And now I will start sharing my screen. So, welcome to Engagement Tips and Tricks for All Learners. So, my name is Paige Durham. I'm the instructional designer at Germanna Community College. In the chat, we have more than just Jason Vance and Nova Wright. So please feel free to post any questions that you have in the chat and they will be answered. So today we're going to talk about engagement. And I'm going to focus on 3 areas of engagement. I'm going to focus on motivation, progression, and participation. And I do apologize right now if you hear a dog barking and or some other very odd noises. So the reason that I picked these 3 areas and the reason that they are in this kind of cycle is because they really all go together and there's really not one place that I would say I wanted to start. So I didn't want to say that any one of the 3 is more important. So I put them in a circle which evens things out so that you can see they're all important. Again, these are 3 areas that I picked based off of the research of John Hattie and the visible learning meta, and that's supposed to be a little x. And I'm going to show you that in just a second. And we're going to only focus on the teaching strategies from that research. But please feel free. The link will be included in the notes section of the slides, so you can go back and check this at any time. So now I'm going to switch screens. And here you can see the visible learning meta X. And if I scroll down, you're going to see influences by domain. And notice that you have a lot to pick from. Again, I am going to stick with teaching strategies. So I'm going to click here. And then you notice that you have some filters over here on the left. And then you also have impact on student achievement here. You can decide how you want to see it, and then you can filter that as well. You're going to see the number of studies and all of those things. And the column that I'm looking at, and is for effect size. So this is how I picked the specific examples that I'm going to give. This is what I used as the basis for the presentation today. Okay, so let's go on. So here are the examples. So we're in motivation. My examples I'm going to talk about today are Jigsaw Method, Immediacy, and Cooperative and Social Learning. For participation, I'm going to talk about examples of flexible discussions, questioning, and self-directed learning. And progression, I'm going to talk about an alignment map, formative feedback, and self-progress checks. So let's go. Motivation. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is motivating students, and I'm going to talk about the Jigsaw Method. If you're not familiar with the Jigsaw Method, it is getting students to work in small groups to research a topic and become an expert. And then you take those experts from those separate groups and you make them into a new group. And so you've put them together as pieces of a puzzle so that they can then teach the other group members about their specific topic. And then together they would present an overarching assignment, presentation, video, something that combines all of their expertise. And then of course you could use that as another point to collaborate and show the class how different groups may have presented their material differently. So, for example, the procedure that I'm going to talk about is presenting a list of topics, have students choose a group based on the topic. Within the group, students will come up with teaching materials to take with them, and then they're going to move to a new group and teach that topic. So here's an example. So we're going to use Life and Works of Charles Dickens. So the students are going to choose a group based on novel names. Then they're going to talk about and find famous quotes from the novel. They're going to talk about important characters and any other tips that are important that go along with that. Then after they've researched it together in that group, then they are broken apart and put into a new group. And so what exactly does that look like? That's a lot of information, and I tend to talk fast, so I will slow down. So now I'm going to say, whoa, and here's my slow down. But what does that look like in Canvas? Here we are in Canvas, and I'm going to click over here to modules. And this is where you're going to see my jigsaw. So this first document is basically a teacher kind of lesson plan that I found from the Bell Foundation. And it goes over some very specific things, vocabulary. It tells you what you need. It talks about the activity as a jigsaw. It gives you some extensions. Again, this may seem very elementary to you. However, if you think about this in the scope of this is what our elementary, middle school students are doing, and these are the kind of activities that they're involved in and engaged in online, then we want to make sure that we provide them with these same kinds of experiences. So here we have some cut out pictures and so on and so on. So that's kind of the lesson plan that I put in my module. And then the next thing is the actual dictogloss. So this is where you begin your jigsaw. So again, as you can see, it is a PowerPoint. It talks about Dickens' early life, and then gives some photos, very simple, just kind of a class overview. The next thing is where they're going to pick their groups. So students are going to pick their groups based upon the titles of the novels. Now, it could be novels they've read or novels they haven't read. If they haven't read the novel, then obviously that's going to be part of the project. Then they're going to go and become an expert on that novel. And this link actually is will help the students to go ahead and pick that novel and group, and it takes them directly to the group page. So after they've picked their group and they've talked about it and they've got their information, they're moved into a new group. And I take one person from each group and I put them together in a new group, and they've been reorganized, and they're going to do a presentation. It could be any kind of presentation. It could be a PowerPoint, Google Slides, it could be a video, it could be a movie, it could be a TikTok, it could be anything that they wanted it to be that covered the information from all of the novels and talked about things such as famous quotes, characters, and other interesting information. Oh. So that is a jigsaw. So jigsaw is just another way of getting students to engage with each other, but also then take that information and teach it to another group. So they're learning and then they're teaching. So they have to know it in order to be able to teach it. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is immediacy, which is reducing the social distance between faculty and the student by increased awareness of approachability, caring, and competence. So this is where the human factor is extremely important, and it comes into play. And how do we get that approachability, caring, and competence to show through in a virtual environment? So some of the ways you could do that are instructor feedback, instructor interaction and support. And I don't necessarily mean support in the sense of your topic or your subject area. I mean support as in a student says, you know, I'm having problems. I don't know what to do. I can't get my work done. I don't have a Wi-Fi. My bills aren't getting paid. You know that there are support features at your institution, and providing those to the student helps build that trust. And that trust is what you need in order for students to feel connected to you in a virtual environment. Email. How are you using email? Formal, informal, or both? Should be both. Response times. How long does it take you to respond? Just are students aware of that? Greetings. So how do you greet your students? So when you entered today, I said good morning and then I sang you a little song. That automatically changed the formality of how we were interacting with each other, because it is informal, that I want my students to feel, so that they are more comfortable and it isn't such a perfect environment that they are afraid to make a mistake. Self-disclosure. So you know what? We make mistakes. We may actually say that we make mistakes. So when we're in the middle of a lecture and we say something incorrect, correct yourself. If you make a mistake in a quiz, own up to that, and that makes you human, and that builds that bond with those students. Use personal photos, goofy photos, Snapchat filters, Bitmoji, anything that makes you and brings that human element into. And the last thing, I put human, but it really is bringing a humorous element into that online environment. So here's some instructional tips. So announcements, positive weekly at a minimum announcement. And think about adding things that catch their attention, whatever that is, so that they make sure that they open that announcement and read it. Or if it's a video, they watch it. Self-intros, use videos, use pictures, and put something in the announcements and put something in the modules and in your as fun facts and things that, what's a fun fact about you? A fun fact about me is that I taught elementary school music for 23 years and I'm a harpist, and now I'm in instructional design. So that's a fun fact. Talk about those things. I'm also a huge Star Wars nerd, and that's also another fun fact, and that's a great way to reach out to students and all kinds of things. So bring in all those elements when you're talking with your students. Do 5-minute videos, make them weekly and make them personal. 5 minutes. If you can make them less than 5 minutes, even better. That way you are sure that they'll watch them and they know what you look like. And each time they see you, you become more familiar with them, to them, and that makes that trust and that openness happen. So have those how it feels convos. Process rather than content. Okay, so how does it feel in this online environment? How are you feeling about the Dickens novel and the Jigsaw? Was it something that you were liked? Ask those kind of questions. Really involve the student in getting their emotions and feelings out, and make that space that they're giving it to you a space where it's safe. So that safe space, so that when they talk to you, they know, everybody in the class is in the same boat. They all are familiar with each other. No one is, different, and it's diverse, but it's a safe place for them to give their opinions. Targeted motivation. So midterms, send out something goofy at midterm just to get their attention, and, really hone in on the fact that you were halfway through, be positive about it. Also, the week before finals, that's the home run week, right? So, you've made it 15, 14 weeks in, and this is your last week. You want to hit that home run. Make sure you take the time to study. Use anything that you can use to get their attention, to provide that targeted motivation on what it is you want them to do. Use intentional word choices. Use our versus the. Use we versus you. Talk about highlights versus feedback. Highlights is a much more informal way of giving feedback, right? But feedback sounds very formal and very structured. So use those kinds of word choices to help open the door for students to build that community. More tips, call to action. So let your students know, why is your course important in the bigger picture of their life? And notice I said the big picture, but it's really their big picture. So why is taking your class important? What is it going to do for them? Give them that connection so that they feel connected to the content and to you. Communication timeline. Be specific. How often are you going to communicate and how often are you going to grade? What about on weekends? When are you going to talk to them? Are you going to be available like all weekend? Or are you only going to be available certain times? Or are they going to get a response or no response? What about in the evenings? Or even better yet, what about 11:50 at night? And the last thing is be patient with your students and yourself. This is a new world in which we live and a new world in which we teach. The virtual learning environment is an uncomfortable place for many of us. So make sure that you take time to be patient with yourself. So what does that look like in Canvas? So I'm just going to show you some announcements. So for example, this is my welcome, and I put in here a little Bitmoji. Why? Oops, hold on one second. There we go. I put in a Bitmoji. Why? Because it's fun, right? I mean, you know, and do I look more approachable by using said crazy thing? Absolutely. Students have always commented in their evaluations that they like the fact that I added these things in. And here's another one. So I put in a Snapchat filter with me with a mask on. So, you know, it's those small things that help get the students involved. And again, in here, you know, in the syllabus, it tells them how they're going to contact me. I put in the syllabus another Bitmoji so that they could see it and they would understand a couple of things. If I scroll down here, obviously, and it tells them, where am I working? From home. So I've told them that I'm at home, but I'm still available to them whenever they need. So those are just a couple examples of what it could look like in Canvas. So now we're going to talk about cooperative and social learning. What is it? It's small groups, and you could do that in Canvas. You could do that in Zoom, and it is social learning. So it's talking about observing and modeling behaviors and attitudes. And that, again, is it's building that collaboration and that community. So how do you do that? Establishing clear group goals. So don't just put your students in breakout rooms and tell them to discuss something. Give them very pointed questions. Keep the groups mid-sized, not too small, not too large. Make the groups flexible. In other words, if you notice that the same group of students is continually, if they're picking their own group, they're picking the same group, break that up. Make them branch out, build trust, and promote open communication. So again, all of this is talking about how to get students engaged in the material. For larger tasks, if you have a big project, give the group roles. So we have a project leader, we have a presenter, we have a researcher, we have a librarian, we have a note taker, those kinds of things, and then have them pick their role and give it back to you. Create a pre-test and a post-test. Why would you do a pre-test? Well, you need to see where your students are and what does this do? It also gives you information on what the students are coming to that specific content area with as far as background knowledge. You know, if you don't know if you make an assumption of what you think they should know and you don't test for that to see, you may miss that and they may not learn it. And then on the post-test, you may see that there is a gap. Consider the process as part of the assessment. So talking about getting from point A to point B and not just point B being the end goal, make that process part of the assessment. Have the students' participation count as part of their grade. Why? Because it makes it more important to them to participate. Use new strategies. Well, that's what this entire webinar is about. Allow groups To reduce the anxiety, especially at the beginning of the semester and very challenging topics, allow students to talk about why they're anxious, what's challenging about it. And then if you establish those group interactions. So have those group discussion boards, have those Zoom breakout rooms, those kinds of things. So what does it look like in Canvas? I'm going to show you in just a second, but I would like to show you this quote first. We all like to have choice. Choice is important. So in Canvas, it looks like possibly a choice board. So what you see is a choice board. You're going to pick a title, and those are articles that interests you. Once you've read the article, you're going to head over to the discussion board and pick the group with the same title as the article that you chose. So these little pluses actually are hyperlinks, and they will take you outside to articles. And these are all about engagement. However, I didn't tell all the students they had to read one article to talk about engagement. I let them pick the article that they wanted to read based upon engagement. The next thing that you would see is the discussions. So each discussion group was titled the same as the article, and they would click on this link, find the article. Then they would answer the questions. How did the ideas from the article connect to what you already know? Did you learn anything new? And what were the challenges? So by doing that, you're giving them the opportunity to talk about it. Then the final step would be to come back, discuss as a class in a synchronous session, all of the ideas from all of the articles before they would take an assessment. Oops. All right, so we looked at a choice board. And now the process for developing the choice board. So you're going to select the content or unit, decide the instructional resources or methods that can be used, the students can pick 2 or 3 that they're interested in, or they can just pick 1. Then create an assessment that allows the students to demonstrate what they learned by making that choice. Okay, so now we're going to move on to participation. So, flexible discussions. What are they? So you're in a Zoom session and you have a great discussion and you're talking about engagement. And you go over to Canvas at the very end of the Zoom session and you create a discussion board, and it is for continuing that conversation. So then students can go directly to Canvas to continue the conversation, and then the next time you meet with the students, you can highlight that conversation that took place after the session. The next thing you want to talk about is using live chat. So in Canvas, you can go and turn on the chat feature to allow students to have a conversation in chat while they're in a face-to-face session. Face-to-face, not necessarily meaning face-to-face in person, but face-to-face online. So the other thing is they can post questions there. They can answer each other's questions. You can use that to go back and look at later, all of those things. Then the other thing you want to make sure is you encourage, when they're doing these discussions, to use text or audio or video, and talk about self-expression, and also talk about access to students who may either be using a screen reader or don't have great speakers, and why, if they are using a video, it's important to caption it. So using Studio and telling the students how they can request captions for studio videos, because we don't want to exclude anyone. And a lot of students may be in a place where they can't, even if they do have sound, they may not be able to turn it on because it may be interrupting someone else's synchronous or virtual school that's going on next to them. Because if you have a house with 4 kids and you got 3 and 2 in high school and they're doing virtual school, and 1 elementary school and they're doing virtual school, and you're in college, having that ability to read those captions rather than play it may be the best way for you to hear it if you're living in a lot of cacophony. Questioning strategies. So teach students to ask questions of themselves, make them stop in the middle of a page when they're reading content and put a question in, so that they have to think about that question. Even if you don't collect the response or you don't talk about it, put the question in so that they think about why it is they're reading the content and what points they should be getting from it. Use questioning to find out background knowledge. So use those pre-tests and low stakes quizzes at the beginning of each module to talk about, to get that information on what the background knowledge of the student. This is my favorite example. So think about this in a math class. So the math question talks about the difference in yardage between a par 5 on a golf course and a par 3. If a student's never been to a golf course or has no knowledge of a golf course, that question is going to automatically be impossible for them to answer. So using those kinds of questions helps you kind of figure out where there might be some gaps in background knowledge that you might want to provide some additional content in the module. The last thing is to create an open discussion and encourage students to post and respond to their peers. If students can't answer the questions for their peers, then of course you can step in and answer. But a lot of students are more than willing to help their classmates out. So have those open discussion boards. The other thing you can do is in your announcements and your discussions, you can gamify them by allowing students to like students' posts, or they can also like your announcement. So I use those, and I have students actually respond with either a Bitmoji or a GIF or a avatar or something, and or their favorite food. Depends on what it is I'm asking, but it also lets me know that they've read the announcement. And again, it is a low stakes kind of personal addition to the course. Self-directed learning. So encourage the students to spend time on lessons and have activities where they have less experience or knowledge.
Okay.
And, that's one of the things that they're going to find. It's going to appear when you go and you do those tests. So think about adding in materials that aren't required, but are just supplements, so that, and make them easy to find. So, maybe at the bottom of every module, you put a header that says additional resources, and then you can put things there. And you can also link to those things within the pages. Use mastery paths to automatically release those supplemental materials based on performance from a quiz or an assignment. So they take a quiz, they earn a certain score, and now they have been directed on a path. Where does that path look the same for every student? No. So again, the goal is to have them achieve the objective. Now, the path that they use to get there may be very different. So it also will help you to diagnose the background knowledge. And what is the main goal? It ensures mastery before the students move on. And the last thing is use differentiated assignments. So students who need that extra help or need it differently, they have that ability, and Canvas has many ways to do that. So at the bottom of an assignment, you can assign it to certain students or certain group of students. You may have some students who need extra time. Use those tools in Canvas to provide that differentiation. And again, what does that look like in Canvas? It's the Canvas tools. It's discussions. It's chat. It's pages with links to other assignments or supplemental materials. It's quizzes, both pre-test, post-test, and assessments. Modules, everything is grouped by in a module, or you can call it a week, you can call it a unit, you can call it a module, but everything in that unit is connected together. Announcement likes, I talked about that already. Mastery paths, so that students are taken on a path based upon a score on a quiz or an assignment, so that you make sure that they have mastery of that content. And differentiating assignments for students who need them, who may need a little bit more time, or they need to turn it in a different way, or you need to modify it so that they have the ability to be successful. And for 3, progression. Deliberate improvement as part of learning, an advancement toward learning goals. So we're talking about getting students, however they come to us, in any way, shape, form, and with any knowledge, and we want them all to be at the exit at the same time with the same amount of knowledge. And that means that we have to figure out how best to move them through that path. So I'm going to talk about an alignment map. I'm going to talk about formative feedback, and I'm going to talk about some self-progress checks that students can do. So what is an alignment map? So it is taking your objectives and aligning them with the materials and the activities and the assessments, so that students can instantly see why they're doing something, so that you don't have to answer, well, why am I reading this? Or why am I doing these problems? You can provide this to them at the beginning as part of the syllabus or right after the syllabus. It can look like a chart. I'm going to give you an example in just a minute. Again, and you're going to, those behaviors are in the objective, are how they're going to do it and how well. And so that you can also see that the assessment is measuring that objective when you put it in a map. So here is my but why. So it ensures that the learning outcome is achievable. You have the proper materials and activities that help the students get that comprehension, so they are equal. It shows clarity and transparency to the student, so they know why they're doing it. And it also allows them to evaluate their learning. It prevents information overload and extra time spent on activities that just don't contribute to the achievement of learning outcomes. So it is doing the spring cleaning and removing anything that you just don't need anymore. So rather than having activities and assignments and quizzes and materials that are either out of date or you're not really using them anymore, it's time to clean house and get rid of those things. And if you put things in that alignment map, it allows you to see very quickly things that you might want to make supplemental rather than required. It also determines if your assessments are accurately and fairly evaluating the achievement of the learning outcome. So what does that look like in Canvas? So embed a Google Doc. So take the time to create a little table, put your module in, put your learning objectives, learning materials, activities, and assessments, put them all on a table, and line them up. Students have found and have stated that they use the course map or alignment map, whatever you want to call it, as much as they use the syllabus. It helps them to see week by week what they're going to be doing, as well as why they're doing it. And when you embed that Google Doc, again, it allows you to put it in multiple courses and make one change if you need to. And that way it goes to all of them and you don't have to upload and download, and students can have it if they need it, or they can refer to it. But again, it makes it super easy to edit very quickly and it to go all the places that it needs to go. Feedback. So we all like feedback, which is why at the end of this, we're going to ask for you to give me an evaluation. What does this help us do? It helps us to improve what we're doing, and it helps the student know what they need to work on. But when you're giving that feedback, it needs to be goal referenced. So, what is it that you want them to do? Make sure you say that. Make it tangible and transparent. Don't give them the hidden questions or the read between the lines kind of feedback. Be very specific. Make it actionable. What do they need to do in order to improve? My daughter is at college, she's at JMU, and she didn't get a great score on a recent quiz. And I asked her what feedback, what did she do wrong? And she said, there isn't any. I said, well, there isn't any? And she said, no. I said, well, then you need to ask for some. So she asked for some, and the feedback that she received was, did you make an appointment with XYZ? Well, that is not very helpful. It wasn't very user-friendly, and it certainly was not very transparent. So that was absolutely not good feedback for her. Again, user-friendly. Is it specific and is personalized? Use the name of the student when you're writing the comments in SpeedGrader. And if they go by a different name than what's in Canvas, make yourself a note somewhere so that if their name is Alan, but they go by Wesley, then you put down Wesley when you write their comments. Make it timely. Don't wait 3 weeks out, and don't give them feedback on something that progressed forward, and the feedback is the reason that the second thing they did wasn't good, because what they did the first time you didn't correct soon enough. Keep it ongoing and make it consistent. So, formative feedback, where can we find it in Canvas? We can use it in discussions by attaching a rubric. We can use it in a quiz by attaching a rubric, and an assignment by attaching a rubric. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't realize until yesterday, or maybe the day before, that you can attach a rubric to a quiz. So that was something that I learned in the process of getting this webinar together. Peer reviews. So have students do peer reviews in discussions. Obviously can't do that in assignments and quizzes, but you can do it in assignments. And then comments and annotations. So in your comment area of discussions, you have the ability to comment on the discussion as a reply, but you also have the ability to comment on the discussion in SpeedGrader. You can also use the annotation tools to highlight things in the discussion, as well as you can do the same thing in the assignments. And in quizzes, your comments can either be overall, or when you're making a multiple choice, when you're putting in the answers, you can always add feedback so that the student, as soon as they click, they have instant feedback about the choice that they made, whether it was right, whether it was wrong. And if it was wrong, maybe a direction and why it was wrong, or what they missed about that was why they made the wrong choice. And what does that look like in Canvas? It looks like lots of things. It looks like all of the things. It looks like rubrics. It looks like peer reviews. It looks like assignments. And in SpeedGrader, you have the ability to leave video and audio feedback, as well as annotations on the SpeedGrader documents and comments. So you can make those video suggestions. You can talk them through the paper, just like if you were sitting at a desk next to them and going through the paper that they had written and you're talking about it. You could do that in a video. Self-progress checks. So these are the things that we can help students do to help them know how they're doing. So what do we have in Canvas? We have new analytics. So you can turn that on for students to use so they can see how their participation can be directly related to their performance. You know, you might want to take some time about week 3 in a course and say, hey, let's talk about your analytics for your course and what does that look like? And let's check your progression and maybe do a little quick tutorial for your class and send a little video about how they can find it and what they might uncover themselves. Again, in the grade section, you know, we all get asked, well, what grade do I need to get on my final exam to get an A? So we can then teach them about the what if function that they can use to calculate that grade or to put in that sample test score to find out what it does to their overall grade. You can also teach students how to do their own to-dos in their course. So they can use it as a guide to what to do next or reminder for themselves in Canvas so that they create those to-dos and it's on them to do and not on you. The calendar. So talking about looking at the calendar where they can see all of their classes and then it helps them to plan out the week because they can see what's due and you can talk about time management and how they need to figure out, you know, you're going to need to spend more time these days to make sure all of this is done by this day and take some time to go over that calendar and what they can use it for. And then the last thing, of course, is a self-check quiz. So that will help you find out where there are knowledge gaps, but it also gives the student a sense of what do they need to go and work on as well. And these can be no grade quizzes or very, very low stake quizzes. And they should be, you know, multiple times so that they have multiple attempts to really understand what it is they're trying to achieve. And what does that look like in Canvas? Here are the links to the pages, the Canvas guides that actually tell the students how to do those things. So for example, in my course that I teach, one of the first things that I do is I create an announcement and I call it, How Do I? And in my How Do I put in Canvas guides. I'm going to show that to you. Oop, not that. Nope. Oh, well. There we go. Now, wow, too many clicks. Okay, so here is my How Do I. So all of these are Canvas tutorials. How do I turn on my notifications? How do I view the calendar? How do I submit? How do I post? How do I reply? This way I can use this each semester and each time I teach it to answer all of those questions that I normally get. So the questions that I am going to add is, how do I view new analytics in a course as a student? How do I add a to-do item in my list view dashboard as a student? How do I add an event to my calendar? How do I use the what if grade feature? And how do I view a rubric for a quiz or a discussion or an assignment? So all of those things can be done and can be added so that students learn to take ownership. So one of the things that we're talking about and we've talked about today is engagement. And I know you didn't do any talking. I know I did all the talking. However, I know that your brain is going and I know this is a lot of information. And I know for some of you, it's brand new information. And for others of you, it's old hat. However, the key is that we need to think outside the box in order to build that community and that trust relationship at very early on in a virtual environment so that students at any point in time will reach out to us for the necessary help that they need in order to master the content that we are here to teach them and we want them to learn. So using engagement and getting them involved and having them take ownership are all parts of moving them from however it is we get them to where we want them when they're done with our class. I appreciate the time that you have spent with me today, and this is the last slide. It is 20 collaborative learning tips and strategies for teachers. All of these things were kind of touched on throughout the presentation, but this graphic kind of puts everything in a nice form that you can use. Again, I'm going to share this presentation with you in just a second. I would like to say thank you all for coming and spending the past 40, 50 minutes with me. And I hope that you have some, hope your wheels are turning in ways that you can think about adding new ways to engage in the virtual environment with your students. And again, I'm going to put the link to the presentation in the chat in just a second, as well as a link to the slides. Just give me 1 second and I will do both of those. And here is the link to the form that for the evaluation to provide us feedback. And here is a link to the slides. Again, the video, there will be a recording posted on the EdTech website, which is also still pictured on your screen as you see in front of you. And yes, you cannot copy the link from the Zoom chat, but you can click on it and it should open in a window, since I made this link available to anyone and not just in the BCCS.